Welcome to the Boxing Gossip channel. Please hit subscribe if you are new. Today we are doing a review of The Gloves Are Off, David Haye versus Tony Bellew. Or should I say, The Gloves Are Off, Tony Bellew versus David Haye. Which I was able to catch today ahead of their big fight rematch, not this weekend, but the weekend after. In terms of the production and in terms of the entertainment value to be obtained from this Gloves Are Off, it's not a vintage Gloves Are Off in the sense that sometimes these programs are the most entertaining when you've got two guys massively going at each other, a bit of a back and forth, you know, the kind of the threat that it may spill over at any moment. You know, sometimes that makes for the best cocktail, for want of a better term, on these types of programs. This one is more of a game of cat and mouse. It's more of a game of psychology. And David Haye actually references that it's a game of psychology on several times throughout the course of their programming. But really, it's a case of Tony Bellew trying desperately to make David Haye bite and to try and call David Haye out and to try and say things that will get David Haye's temper up. Whereas David Haye is trying to be cool, calm, collected and doing his level best to bite. Not to bite, should I say. At one point during the programme, David Haye almost bites, but then he restrains himself and he says, no, you almost got me there. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Something to that effect. David Haye, for what it's worth, probably tries to subtly troll Tony Bellew. David Haye picks up on the fact that Tony Bellew doesn't like being the glamour guy, for want of a better term. So quite early on, David Haye says that Tony Bellew is the A side. Quite early on, and that he's the B side. And Tony Bellew clearly doesn't like it. At one point, Tony Bellew even denies that he's the A side. Later on, what does he say? Haye suggests that if he goes and beats, if Bellew goes and beats him again and then drops down to fight the winner of the World Boxing Super Series cruiserweight, Tony Bellew could go down in history as the greatest cruiserweight of all time. He later changes that to the greatest cruiserweight in British boxing history. And again, you can see Tony Bellew, who wants to be the aggressive guy, who wants to turn it into a spiteful occasion. He hates it. For me, Tony Bellew is very uncomfortable when David Haye is saying Bellew's the A side, or when David Haye is suggesting that Bellew could be the greatest cruiserweight of all time. Haye then goes on and says that Tony Bellew is a puppet master, and he's a master of psychology, and he got in David Haye's head in the lead up to the first fight. And again, Tony Bellew hates it. He just hates the sort of crediting. He's much more comfortable. Tony Bellew's maybe one of these guys who's very comfortable going into a fight, hating an opponent. You see it with certain fighters. Dillian White's a good example. When Dillian White is fighting an opponent, there's always going to be bad blood between the two of them. When he fought Chisora, when he fought Allen, when he fought Joshua, when he fought Lewison, when he fought Lucas Brown, even when he fought Robert Helenius. Dillian White's one of these guys. I don't know if it motivates him. I don't know if it's just something to do with his psyche, but he seems to only want to go into these fights when he can really hate on his opponents. And maybe it's the same with Tony Bellew. I mean, we've seen Tony Bellew have beef in British boxing well before the David Haye saga, if we cast our minds back to King Clev, Nathan Cleverly, when he was fighting Tony Bellew. And there's other examples as well. I remember Bellew kicking off with Oval Mackenzie years and years and years and years ago. So maybe it's just that Tony Bellew thrives off that animosity between an opponent, and that's where he's at his most comfortable. But for me, David Haye, whilst Haye is uncomfortable himself, because Haye is used to being the bold, brash guy making predictions about how he's going to score a devastating knockout. So whilst David Haye himself is somewhat uncomfortable in that role, for me, David Haye, being that quiet, understated guy, is unsettling for Tony Bellew. And there's a number of instances I've referenced where clearly the programming isn't going the way that Tony Bellew wants, and he wanted to turn it into a real back and forth and call out David Haye. But David Haye sort of keeps his temper, credits Tony Bellew when due, and to be fair, David Haye doesn't really blame the fight on the injury. I've been one of those people, and I am a historic David Haye fan, and I am a historic person who's underestimated Tony Bellew. So maybe it's just me getting it wrong yet again. But David Haye is someone who I've almost said that wasn't David Haye last time out because of the injury. But here, Haye doesn't really use the injury. He refers to the fact that his mindset was all wrong going into the fight. He refers that he was approaching the fight like a 15-year-old amateur, the way he was throwing punches. He makes it clear that in his perspective, he was underestimating Tony Bellew. He said he overlooked Bellew. He said he didn't do his homework on Tony Bellew. He said he should have done his homework for Tony Bellew. He said this time round, his career's on the line. If it goes wrong, his career's over. He can't afford any more of those mistakes. And he underestimated Bellew. Bellew was better than he expected. Bellew again tries to push buttons, tries to make David Haye bite, tries to tear into David Haye. But Haye really doesn't bite, and there's a lot of awkward silences in this programming. There's a lot of awkward silences where Tony Bellew says this long dig at David Haye, and then Bellew pauses, waiting for David Haye to jump all over him and to defend himself. And David Haye just doesn't. David Haye just lets Tony Bellew speak, just allows Bellew to finish, doesn't feel the need to come back at him. It's kind of awkward TV. Clearly it's not the way Bellew was hoping it went. For me, Haye just elected not to bite. Maybe his ego's taken a knock after the first fight. Maybe after all the pullouts, after all the injuries, after the last time out, he kind of felt he couldn't go out there saying that he was going to knock out Tony Bellew again, and he couldn't go out there giving it the big I am. So maybe his ego took a bit of a knock after that last loss, but Haye plays it very, very cool in there and really refuses to bite. It's a David Haye unlike we've seen before. Even when Tony Bellew then decides to swerve in terms of his attack and start saying that David Haye could have fought Deontay Wilder. Why did he avoid Deontay Wilder? Why did he fight a fat cruiserweight from Liverpool when he could have stepped in and made an easy fight with Deontay Wilder? And again, Haye doesn't really bite. One of the sort of better points that Tony Bellew does make for me, there's 2 points that Tony Bellew makes that I think are linked and that I think are very relevant. The first one is he said that in the first fight he may have been 5 rounds down on the cards, but his whole approach was never to try and outpoint Haye early on. His approach was just to take David Haye late, and he said to David Haye after 5 rounds, your time is up, because he kind of perceives David Haye to be this explosive 4 or 5 round fighter. Now, David Haye said he didn't hear Bellew say that, but regardless, if that genuinely was Tony Bellew's approach, then fair play to him. He called it bang on. He couldn't have predicted that David Haye's Achilles would have gone, but he did know that David Haye was an aging fighter who had a lot of wear and tear, who'd had a lot of previous injuries, and he did know that David Haye is a guy who probably is at his most explosive in the early rounds. So, fair play to Bellew for that reasoning. Bellew then goes on a link point to say that David Haye will always tire. He says David Haye has to tire. It's the genetics. It's David Haye's genetics. It's the way he fights. It's what David Haye's all about. So Bellew kind of implies that he's going to adopt a similar approach to the next fight. Johnny Nelson, who hosts it, then turns to David Haye and asks David Haye what will his approach be. David Haye says something like, well, wait for the bell to ring, walk out to the centre of the ring and punch him. David Haye doesn't really, again, give too much away. Look, of course, my take is this is all meaningless. There's certain boxing fans who will be like, tick, cross, David Haye gets +1, Tony Bellew makes a good point, +1, David Haye doesn't bite, +1. It's all irrelevant. And really, when these guys step in the ring and knock 7 bells out of each other, who said what at the gloves are off isn't really going to be relevant. But David Haye does say that first time round Tony Bellew got in his head. David does say that first time round he overlooked Tony Bellew. So who knows, even though I'm writing it off as irrelevant, maybe there is a small percentage of relevance hidden in there somewhat. What it is viewing for the boxing fans. Whether you think it's relevant or not, to the course of the fight, it's entertainment. And as a boxing fan, as a boxing junkie, we tend to hoover these things up. Good to see some build-up for this fight. Obviously, it's getting close. I know the hardcore fans turn their nose up at this fight. The real hardcore fans. For me, it's entertainment. For me, I do still enjoy it. And I'm enjoying seeing some build-up to the fight, whether you like it or not. from an entertainment perspective, as the gloves are off go, I'd give it a 5 or a 6 out of 10. Didn't really catch fire. One of the two didn't really want to engage. Could it have been more entertaining? Yes. But at the same time, David Haye probably would have looked ridiculous if he'd come out and given it the big I am after what happened last time round. Just my take. Let me know your thoughts. Leave your comments in the section below. As ever, if you enjoyed this video, please take the time to hit subscribe. If you're new, you haven't already done so, please subscribe. Please press thumbs up. Thanks for tuning in.